The wheels of the stagecoach groaned against the rutted trail as Clara Whitfield pressed herself into the worn leather seat, her gloved hands clutched tightly in her lap. Wyoming territory stretched endlessly before her, a vast expanse of scorched grassland and distant mountains that promised both freedom and uncertainty. She had left Cheyenne at dawn, carrying nothing but a small valise and the desperate hope of escaping the memories that haunted her every waking moment. The other passengers, a portly merchant and his nervous wife, had long since ceased their attempts at conversation. Clara's rigid posture and the shadows beneath her green eyes spoke of a grief too raw for polite society. They couldn't know that beneath her modest traveling dress. Fading bruises still painted her ribs in shades of yellow and purple. The final gifts from a husband whose death 3 months prior had brought not tears, but a flood of guilty relief. As the coach lurched over a particularly deep rut, Clara touched the small derringer hidden in her reticule. Samuel had taught her one useful thing in their brief, brutal marriage: that the world was full of men who saw women as property to be claimed and broken. She would not be caught defenseless again. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, transforming the coach into a sweltering box. Through the dust-caked window, Clara watched the landscape blur past, endless miles of sagebrush and buffalo grass, broken only by weathered rock formations that rose like ancient sentinels from the earth. The driver had promised they would reach the next way station by sunset, but the horizon seemed to stretch forever, mocking such human schedules. It was the merchant's wife who heard it first, a sharp whistle cutting through the monotonous rumble of wheels. Her face paled as she gripped her husband's arm. "Indians? Nonsense," the merchant blustered, though sweat beaded on his forehead. "The tribes have been pushed west. We're perfectly—" The crack of a rifle shattered his reassurance. The coach lurched violently as the horses screamed and bolted. Clara was thrown against the door as more shots rang out, not from Apache or Cheyenne warriors, but from white men with bandanas pulled over their faces, emerging from behind a cluster of rocks. "Stand and deliver." The lead bandit's voice was rough with whiskey and violence. The terrified driver hauled on the reins, bringing the coach to a skidding halt that sent up clouds of choking dust. What followed was swift and brutal. The bandits dragged them from the coach, rifling through belongings with practiced efficiency. The merchant blubbered and pleaded as they took his gold watch and money belt. His wife sobbed quietly, clutching a cameo brooch that one of the outlaws ripped from her throat. When rough hands seized Clara's valise, she remained silent, her jaw clenched. One of the bandits, younger than the others with mean eyes and liquor on his breath, stepped close enough that she could smell the filth on him. "Well, well, ain't you a pretty little widow?" His gaze traveled over her black mourning dress with ugly speculation. "Traveling alone? That ain't too smart." Clara's hand moved toward her reticule, but another bandit knocked it from her grasp. The derringer tumbled uselessly into the dust. The young outlaw laughed, reaching for her. "Boss said take the valuables and go," one of the older bandits warned. "She looks valuable to me." The young one leered. The leader, a scarred man with cold eyes, intervened with a sharp whistle. "No time for that, boy. Someone might have heard the shots." He turned to the trembling driver. "You keep riding east and don't look back. Anyone follows us, these folks'll pay for it." They left as suddenly as they had appeared, taking the horses and leaving the coach stranded like a broken toy in the vast emptiness. The driver cursed and spat, examining the damage. One wheel was cracked from the violent stop. "We can't stay here," the merchant wheezed, his face red with exertion and fear. "We need to walk to the way station. It's 15 miles. The driver protested. In this heat, with no water, they took everything. As they argued, Clara noticed storm clouds building on the northern horizon. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain and something else, danger. Without horses, without water, they were as good as dead. She made her decision quietly, slipping away while the men continued their heated debate. The merchant's wife noticed first, calling out in alarm, but Clara didn't turn back. She couldn't. Something deep in her bones told her that staying with the coach meant certain death, either from thirst or from the bandits' return. The open prairie swallowed her quickly. She walked west, away from the trail, her boots struggling through the sandy soil. Behind her, the shouts grew fainter until they were lost entirely in the vast silence of the frontier. As the sun began its descent toward the ragged horizon, painting the clouds in shades of crimson and gold, Clara finally stopped. Her throat was parched, her feet blistered, and the reality of her situation struck with crushing force. She was alone in a wilderness that had swallowed countless souls before her, with no water, no weapon, and no hope of rescue. The first night was a waking nightmare. Every sound, the rustle of wind through grass, the distant howl of coyotes, the scurrying of unseen creatures, sent her heart racing. She found shelter of sorts in a shallow depression between two boulders, pulling sagebrush over herself for warmth as the desert cold descended. Sleep came in fitful bursts, bringing dreams of Samuel's face twisted in rage, his hands reaching for her throat. She woke, gasping, the phantom pain of old injuries flaring to life. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent to her suffering, and she wondered if this was how she would die, not from Samuel's fists, but from her own foolish attempt at freedom. Dawn brought little relief. Her lips were cracked, her tongue swollen with thirst. She forced herself to move, knowing that staying still meant certain death. The landscape blurred in the rising heat, mesa and sky melting together in shimmering waves. It was then she saw him. He appeared like a figure from a dream, mounted on a painted horse at the crest of a low rise, an Apache warrior, his long black hair bound with a strip of red cloth, a rifle balanced across his saddle. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs as he began to descend toward her, moving with the fluid grace of one born to this harsh land. Every story she'd heard in the settlement screamed through her mind, tales of savage attacks, of white women carried off to fates worse than death. Her hand fumbled for the derringer that was no longer there, finding only empty air. The warrior dismounted at a respectful distance, his movements slow and deliberate. He was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 30 summers, with intelligent dark eyes that assessed her condition with what looked almost like concern. He wore traditional dress, buckskin leggings, a cotton shirt, moccasins that made no sound on the rocky ground. When he took a step closer, Clara found her voice, hoarse and cracked but sharp with desperate fear. "Touch me and I'll scream!" The words tore from her throat, a futile threat in this empty vastness where no one would hear. The Apache stopped, his head tilting slightly. Something flickered in his eyes, not the savage hunger she'd expected, but something almost like understanding. Slowly, deliberately, he reached for the rifle slung across his back. Clara's legs trembled, too weak to run. This was how it would end. Then, not Samuel's brutality, but a bullet in the desert. She raised her chin, determined to meet death with what dignity she had left. But instead of aiming the weapon, the warrior laid it carefully on the ground, then his knife. Then he held up his empty hands, palms out, speaking in accented but clear English. "No harm. You need water." He gestured to a water skin hanging from his horse's saddle, then took several steps backward, increasing the distance between them. Clara stared, her fear-addled mind struggling to process this unexpected mercy. "Water," he repeated, pointing again. "You die without it." The water skin hung from the painted horse's saddle like a promise of salvation, beaded with moisture in the harsh morning light. Clara's throat constricted painfully at the sight, but her feet remained rooted to the sandy ground. The Apache warrior, if that's what he truly was, maintained his distance, his dark eyes patient and watchful. "My name is Joseph," he said slowly, the English words careful on his tongue. "My people call me Naiche. You are dying. White woman. Take the water." Clara's legs trembled. Every instinct screamed against trusting this man. Yet what choice did she have? Death by thirst was certain. Death by his hand merely possible, with movements as cautious as a spooked deer. She edged toward the horse. The animal, a beautiful pinto with intelligent eyes, stood perfectly still as she fumbled with the water skin. The first drops on her cracked lips were paradise. She fought the urge to gulp greedily, forcing herself to take small sips, as Samuel had once taught her during a rare moment of practical advice. Slowly, Joseph murmured approval. Too fast makes sickness. When she'd drunk enough to ease the worst of her thirst, Clara stepped back quickly, the water skin clutched like a talisman. Joseph made no move toward her, instead reaching into a leather pouch at his side. He produced strips of dried meat and a handful of what looked like nuts, placing them on a flat rock between them before retreating again. "Eat," he instructed. "Then we talk about why a white woman walks alone in Apache land." I didn't mean to be here." Clara's voice was still hoarse. "There were bandits, the stagecoach." Joseph's expression darkened. "White bandits. They grow bold, like coyotes. The army chases my people but lets these men roam free." He gestured to the food. "Eat. Sun climbs high soon." The jerked meat was tough and salty. The nuts some variety she didn't recognize, but Clara forced herself to chew slowly. As she ate, she studied her unlikely savior. His features were strong and angular, marked by wind and sun. A faded scar ran along his jaw, and his hands, now busy checking his horse's hooves, showed the calluses of a life lived hard. "Where were you going?" Joseph asked, without looking up from his task. "Fort Bridger." Clara lied instinctively, then wondered why she bothered. What did it matter now? "No, California. Anywhere but where I was." He glanced at her, taking in her morning dress, the fading bruises just visible at her collar. His expression didn't change, but something in his manner softened almost imperceptibly. "California is far, many days' ride, many dangers." He straightened, wiping his hands on his leggings. "I know a place. Water, shelter. You rest there, then decide." Clara's immediate instinct was refusal, but the sun was already climbing higher, and heat shimmers were beginning to dance across the landscape. She had no idea which direction to walk, no supplies, no hope of surviving another day alone. "Why?" The word came out sharp with suspicion. "Why would you help me?" Joseph was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight of old pain. 3 summers ago, soldiers came to our camp. My sister tried to run. She was young, frightened. They shot her like a rabbit." He looked at Clara directly. "Not all Apache kill white women. Not all white women deserve to die of thirst." The simple statement hung between them, an offering of sorts. Clara found herself nodding slowly. Joseph helped her mount his horse, careful not to touch her directly, instead offering his cupped hands as a step. Clara settled awkwardly in the unfamiliar saddle, acutely aware of her torn skirts and impractical boots. Joseph walked alongside, leading the horse with practiced ease across terrain that would have broken her within hours. They traveled in relative silence through the morning, stopping frequently for Clara to sip water and rest in whatever shade they could find. The landscape shifted around them, red rock formations giving way to scrubland, then back to open prairie dotted with choyas and barrel cacti. As the sun reached its zenith, Joseph led them into a narrow canyon Clara would never have noticed on her own. The temperature dropped blessed degrees in the shadow of the rock walls. At the canyon's heart lay a small spring-fed pool, surrounded by cottonwoods and willows, an oasis hidden in the harsh land. "We rest here until evening," Joseph announced, helping Clara dismount. Her legs nearly buckled, muscles screaming from the unaccustomed riding. He made camp with efficient movements, gathering wood, starting a small fire with flint and steel, unpacking supplies from his saddlebags. Clara found a flat rock near the pool and sat heavily, pulling off her boots to reveal bloody blisters. "Wait," Joseph commanded. He disappeared into the brush, returning with broad leaves and what looked like moss. From his pouch, he produced a small clay pot filled with pungent salve. "Medicine," he explained, gesturing to her feet. "You put on, helps healing." Clara hesitated, then carefully applied the salve, surprised by its cooling effect. As she wrapped her feet in the leaves, following Joseph's demonstrated technique, She found herself stealing glances at this strange man who'd appeared like a ghost to save her life. Evening brought cooler air and a spectacular sunset that painted the canyon walls in shades of orange and purple. Joseph had caught 2 rabbits in snares, and the smell of roasting meat made Clara's stomach clench with hunger. They ate in companionable silence, the fire crackling between them. As darkness fell and the first stars appeared, Clara finally found courage to speak. "You're English? Where did you learn?" "Mission school, when young." Joseph's voice carried a bitter note. "Priests said we must forget Apache ways, become white men. I learned their words but kept my spirit." He poked at the fire with a stick. "Useful now, speaking to lost white women." Despite everything, Clara felt her lips twitch toward a smile, the first in months. "I suppose it is. You run from someone." Joseph observed. "It wasn't a question. The marks on your throat, your arms, a man did this." Clara's hand went instinctively to her collar. "My husband, he's dead now." "You killed him?" The blunt question should have offended her, but somehow it didn't. "No, he fell from his horse, drunk, broke his neck." She stared into the flames. "I wanted to feel sad, tried to mourn properly, but all I felt was free." Joseph nodded slowly. "The missions taught that women must obey husbands, even cruel ones. Apache way is different. A woman can leave a man who brings dishonor, can return to her family, find new husband, or live alone with respect." "Alone with respect," Clara repeated softly. "I can't imagine such a thing." "White man's world is hard for women alone." Joseph agreed. "But land doesn't care if you are man or woman, white or Apache, only if you are strong enough to live." They talked late into the night, trading stories with the careful distance of 2 wounded creatures learning to trust. Joseph spoke of his people's forced removal from their lands, the broken treaties, the loss of his parents to soldiers' bullets. Clara found herself describing her marriage, the slow escalation from harsh words to harder hands, the isolation, the despair that had finally driven her to flee. "I thought anywhere would be better," she admitted. Even death in the desert seemed preferable to another day in that house. "Death is easy to find," Joseph said quietly. "Living, that takes courage." As the fire burned low, he prepared a sleeping place for Clara, a bed of pine boughs covered with a blanket from his pack. He positioned himself across the fire, rifle within reach but making no threatening moves. "Sleep now," he advised. "Tomorrow we travel far." Clara lay on the makeshift bed, staring up at stars brighter than she'd ever seen in town. Every sound made her tense. The call of an owl, the rustle of wind in the cottonwoods, the distant yip of coyotes. But gradually, the steady sound of Joseph's breathing and the dying fire's warmth worked their magic. For the first time in years, she slept without nightmares. She woke to find Joseph already up, the fire rekindled and something cooking in a small pot. The morning air was crisp and clean, scented with sage and pine. Her feet, wrapped in his medicine and leaves, hurt far less than they should have. "Coffee," Joseph announced, producing 2 battered tin cups. "Traded for it last month. Thought to save, but seems good morning for sharing." The coffee was strong and bitter, but Clara savored it like fine wine. As they broke their fast with more jerky and some kind of flatbread Joseph produced from his supplies, she found herself studying him in the morning light. The dangerous savage of frontier legend was nowhere to be found. Only a man who moved through the world with quiet competence and unexpected kindness. "Where will you take me?" she asked finally. "There is trading post, 2 days north. Man there is fair, has Apache wife, doesn't cheat too much. You can rest, decide next path." He paused, seeming to weigh his words. "Or there is ranch, 3 days east. Woman there lost husband last winter. Might need help. Give you work." The fact that he'd thought through her options, considered her future beyond just surviving the desert, touched something deep in Clara's chest. "And you? Where will you go?" "Mountains," Joseph replied simply. "My people camp there for summer. Been scouting for army movements. Hunting." A shadow crossed his face. "Always hunting now." For food, for safety, for places white men haven't claimed. They prepared to leave as the sun climbed higher. Joseph showed Clara how to wrap cloth around her head for protection, how to sit the horse to minimize pain from her blisters. His hands were gentle as he adjusted her stirrups, careful always to touch only leather and wood, never her directly. As they emerged from the hidden canyon back into the harsh brilliance of open desert, Clara found herself looking back at the small oasis with something like regret. For one night, she'd felt something she'd almost forgotten existed, safety. Not the false safety of walls and laws that had failed to protect her from Samuel, but the simple security of human kindness in a vast, indifferent land. "Thank you," she said suddenly, the words inadequate but necessary. Joseph glanced back at her, a rare smile softening his weathered features. "No thanks needed. We all walk hard paths. Sometimes they cross, and we can make journey easier for each other." As they continued north, the morning sun warm on their backs and miles of uncertainty ahead, Clara realized the trembling fear that had lived in her chest for so long had quieted. She was still lost, still running, still uncertain of her future, but for the first time in memory, she was not alone. The morning sun climbed higher as they entered a landscape of towering red rock formations, their surfaces carved by wind and time into fantastic shapes. Joseph led them along paths Clara could barely discern, through narrow passages between stone sentinels that seemed to guard ancient secrets. The painted horse picked its way carefully among loose stones and scattered bones bleached white by the desert sun. "This place," Joseph said, gesturing to the maze of red stone. "My people call it Were Eagle's Nest. Good for hiding, but also dangerous. Easy to lose direction." Clara gripped the saddle horn tighter as the horse navigated a particularly narrow ledge. Far below, she could see the dried bed of what must have once been a river, its sandy bottom cracked like broken pottery. The height made her dizzy, but Joseph's steady presence ahead kept her focused. By midday, the heat had become a living thing, pressing down on them with suffocating weight. The red rocks radiated warmth like ovens, and Clara's dress clung to her with sweat. They stopped in the shade of an overhanging cliff, where Joseph produced more water and a handful of dried berries. "Drink small," he reminded her, though he needn't have bothered. Clara had learned the desert's first lesson well. Water was life, and life was measured in careful sips. As they rested, Clara noticed Joseph studying the sky with a frown. Dark clouds were building to the west, their undersides heavy with the promise of rain. "Storm coming," he said. "In desert, rain brings flash floods. We must reach higher ground." They pushed on despite the heat, climbing steadily through the rock maze. Clara's blistered feet throbbed in her boots, and her back ached from the unfamiliar riding position. But she said nothing, drawing on reserves of endurance she hadn't known she possessed. The first crack of thunder echoed through the canyons like artillery fire. Joseph urged the horse to a faster pace, his usual calm replaced by focused urgency. They were climbing a steep switchback trail when Clara's foot slipped from the stirrup. She grabbed for the saddle horn, but her sweat-slick hands couldn't find purchase. For one terrifying moment, she felt herself sliding sideways, the rocky ground rushing up to meet her. Joseph moved with liquid speed. His strong hands caught her waist, steadying her before she could fall. For just an instant, they were close enough that she could see flecks of gold in his dark eyes, smell the sage and leather scent of him. Then he stepped back quickly, his hands dropping to his sides. "Sorry," he said, and Clara wasn't sure if he was apologizing for touching her or for the near fall. "You saved me," she managed, her heart still racing. "Thank you." He nodded, then helped her adjust her position in the saddle, his touch careful and impersonal now. But Clara noticed the slight tremor in his hands, the way he avoided meeting her eyes directly. They reached a wide ledge just as the first fat raindrops began to fall. Joseph quickly led them back under an overhang that formed a natural shelter, deep enough to protect both them and the horse from the coming deluge. Within moments, the rain arrived in earnest. a gray curtain that turned the world beyond their shelter into a blur of water and stone. Desert rain, Joseph explained as they watched the water cascade off the rocks in muddy waterfalls. Comes fast, leaves fast, but dangerous while it lasts. As if to prove his point, they heard a distant roar that grew steadily louder. Through the rain, Clara glimpsed a wall of brown water racing through the canyon below, carrying with it branches, stones, and debris. The flash flood filled the dry riverbed in seconds, transforming it into a raging torrent. If we'd been down there, Clara didn't finish the thought. But we weren't, Joseph said simply. The land teaches lessons. Those who listen survive. With the rain came blessed coolness, and Clara found herself relaxing for the first time since morning. She sat on a flat stone, unconsciously rubbing her sore feet through her boots. Take them off, Joseph suggested. Let feet breathe. I will check the medicine. Clara hesitated only a moment before complying. Her stockings were ruined, torn and blood-stained. But the leaves and salve had done their work. The blisters looked better, less angry and swollen. Joseph knelt before her, examining her feet with the detached efficiency of a doctor. He produced fresh leaves and more salve from his seemingly endless supplies. As he worked, Clara found herself studying his face, the concentration in his expression, the gentle competence of his hands. You know much about healing, she observed. My grandmother was medicine woman. He replied without looking up. Taught me plants, how to read bodies' needs, useful knowledge when bullets and disease take so many. When he finished, Clara's feet felt better than they had in days. She wanted to thank him again, but sensed he would only brush off her gratitude. Instead, she asked, Will you tell me about your family? Your grandmother sounds wise. For the first time, Joseph truly smiled, a transformation that made him look years younger. As the rain drummed on the rocks around them, he began to speak of his childhood. He told her of learning to track elk with his father, of his grandmother's patient lessons in plant lore, of races with his sister through summer meadows. Before the soldiers came, he said, his voice growing darker, we lived good lives, hard sometimes. Yes, but free. Now, he gestured toward the rain. Now we hide like rabbits, run from place to place, watch our children grow up hungry. Our elders die far from sacred grounds. Clara felt the weight of his words, the grief that ran deeper than personal loss. I'm sorry, she said quietly. I know those are just words, but I mean them. Joseph looked at her then, something shifting in his expression. You understand loss, he said. It wasn't a question. Not just husband, something else broke in you before he did. The perception stunned her. Clara found herself nodding slowly. My parents, they died when I was 15. Fever took them both within days. I had nowhere to go, no family back east who wanted another mouth to feed. So when Samuel offered marriage, she laughed bitterly. I thought he was saving me. He was older, established. Everyone said I was lucky. Desperate people make desperate choices, Joseph said softly. No shame in surviving. The rain was beginning to lessen, sunlight breaking through in patches to create veils of golden mist. Clara watched the play of light and shadow, gathering courage for her next words. I've never told anyone this, she began. But there were times I thought about ending things, when Samuel was at his worst, when I couldn't see any escape. The only thing that stopped me was stubbornness. I think pure spite. I wouldn't let him win that completely. Spite can be its own strength. Joseph agreed. My people have a saying, the oak breaks in the storm, but the willow bends and survives. You learn to bend. Now you learn to grow straight again. They sat in comfortable silence as the storm passed, leaving the air clean and filled with the scent of wet earth. The floodwaters below were already receding, leaving behind a changed landscape marked by new channels and deposited debris. When they resumed their journey, the wet ground made travel treacherous. The horse picked its way carefully, and Joseph walked alongside, ready to steady Clara if needed. They were descending a particularly steep section when she finally found the courage to ask what she'd been wondering all day. "Why do you really help me?" The truth this time. Joseph was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "When I saw you in the desert, ready to die rather than be touched, I recognized something. Same look in my sister's eyes before the soldiers. Same look in many Apache women when taken captive." He paused. "Maybe I help you because I couldn't help her. Maybe because kindness costs nothing but means everything. Maybe because the world is hard enough without adding to its cruelty." Clara blinked back unexpected tears. "I was so frightened when I first saw you. All the stories they tell in the settlements. Stories told by those who benefit from fear." Joseph said, "Easier to take land from monsters than from men. Easier to kill savages than fathers and brothers." They emerged from the red rock maze as afternoon shadows grew long. Before them stretched a different landscape, rolling hills dotted with pinon and juniper. The mountains blue smudges on the horizon. Joseph pointed to a line of cottonwoods in the distance. "Water there. Good place to camp tonight." As they made their way across the more open terrain, Clara found herself already dreading the moment when their paths would diverge. This strange, quiet man had shown her more genuine kindness in 2 days than she'd known in years. The thought of continuing alone, whether to the trading post or the ranch he'd mentioned, filled her with a loneliness sharper than any she'd felt in the desert. "Joseph," she said suddenly, then stopped, unsure how to continue. He glanced back at her, waiting. The late afternoon sun caught his profile, highlighting the strong lines of his face. "I don't know how to thank you," she finished lamely, though that wasn't what she'd meant to say at all. "Live well," he replied simply. "Make your freedom mean something. That is thanks enough." They reached the cottonwoods as sunset painted the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. A small stream ran clear and cold, and the grass grew thick and green along its banks. Joseph set about making camp with his usual efficiency, but Clara noticed he chose a spot with good sight lines in all directions, his rifle never far from reach. As she helped gather firewood, insisting over his protests that she contribute something, Clara realized that for the first time in her life, she felt like a partner rather than a burden. It was a small thing, perhaps, but it shifted something fundamental in how she saw herself. That night, as they shared a meal of fresh rabbit and wild onions Joseph had found growing near the stream, Clara made a decision. She didn't know what her future held, didn't know if she'd find work at the ranch or try for California after all, but she knew she would face it as herself, not as Samuel's victim or society's charity case, but as a woman who had walked through fire and desert and emerged, if not unscathed, then at least unbroken. "You've given me more than water and food," she told Joseph as the stars began to appear. "You've shown me that kindness still exists, that I can trust my own strength. I won't forget." Joseph studied her across the fire, and something warm flickered in his usually guarded eyes. "You always had strength," he said. "Just needed reminding." As the fire crackled between them and the night sounds of the desert rose around their small camp, Clara felt a contentment she hadn't known was possible. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new fears to face. But tonight, she was simply a woman sitting by a fire with a good man, watching the stars wheel overhead in their eternal dance. The world was still hard and dangerous. She was still far from any certain safety, but she was no longer running. She was choosing her path, and that, she thought as she wrapped herself in the blanket Joseph had given her, made all the difference. The morning dawned crisp and clear, with dew sparkling on the grass like scattered diamonds. Clara woke to find Joseph already alert, his body tense as he scanned the horizon. Something in his posture made her stomach tighten with apprehension. "Riders," he said quietly when he noticed she was awake. 6, maybe 7, moving along the valley trail." Clara sat up quickly, her hand instinctively reaching for the rifle that wasn't there. "Bandits? Army patrol?" Joseph's voice was carefully neutral, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. "Looking for Apache. Probably, or deserters, or both. They broke camp swiftly and silently, erasing all traces of their presence with practiced efficiency. Joseph helped Clara mount, then led the horse into a grove of cottonwoods, moving deeper into cover as the sound of approaching hoofbeats grew louder. Through the screen of leaves, Clara could see the patrol clearly, blue uniforms dusty from travel, faces hard beneath their campaign hats. The sergeant leading them was a grizzled man with cold eyes that swept the landscape like a predator seeking prey. "Apache sign here, Sarge," one of the troopers called out, dismounting near where they'd camped. Fire was recent. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. Beside her, Joseph remained perfectly still, one hand on his horse's muzzle to keep it quiet. She could feel the heat of him where their shoulders nearly touched in the confined space. "Spread out," the sergeant ordered. "Check the trees." The soldiers began moving toward their hiding spot, rifles at the ready. Clara forgot to breathe. If they were discovered, Joseph would be shot on sight. Apache warriors weren't taken prisoner, and her presence would be impossible to explain innocently. Just as one trooper started toward their specific grove, a distant whistle pierced the air, the signal of another patrol. "Sergeant Morrison." A rider galloped in from the east. "Lieutenant wants all patrols back at the fort. There's been a raid on the Baxter spread. Settlers are demanding action." The sergeant spat tobacco juice and wheeled his mount. "Apache, that's what they're saying. Though Baxter's been feuding with the Mexicans over water rights, so—" The messenger shrugged. "Mount up," Morrison barked. "We'll check this area on the way back." Clara didn't breathe properly until the last echo of hoofbeats faded into the distance. When she finally looked at Joseph, she found him watching her with an unreadable expression. "You could have called out," he said quietly. "Told them bandits took you. They would have helped a white woman." "And shot you," Clara replied, surprising herself with the fierce certainty in her voice. "I won't have your blood on my conscience." Something shifted in Joseph's dark eyes, a deepening of the warmth she'd glimpsed before. "We need to move. They'll come back, and others will follow. Where there's one patrol, there are many." They traveled hard through the morning, pushing deeper into rough country where the cavalry's horses would struggle. Joseph chose paths that led through dense brush and over rocky ridges, terrain that would discourage pursuit but made for difficult riding. By midday, they reached a narrow canyon split by a seasonal stream. Joseph called a halt in the shade of a massive boulder, helping Clara dismount. Her legs nearly buckled. The hard riding had taken its toll. "Rest," he commanded, leading the horse to water. "We're safe for now." Clara sank onto a flat rock, pulling off her boots to examine her feet. The blisters had reopened, seeping blood into what remained of her stockings. She was so focused on the pain that she didn't hear Joseph approach until he knelt before her. "Let me see." His voice was gentle but brooked no argument. As he examined her injuries, Clara studied his bent head, noting the way sunlight caught blue highlights in his black hair. His touch was careful, clinical, but she felt each contact like a small flame against her skin. "You need proper boots," he said, producing his medicine supplies. "These are made for town streets, not desert travel." "I wasn't exactly planning an extensive journey when I left," Clara said, a tempting lightness. Joseph glanced up at her, a hint of smile playing at his lips. Life rarely asks our plans. He applied the cooling salve with practiced movements. "At trading post, we get you moccasins, better for walking, healing." The casual way he said "we" made something flutter in Clara's chest. She watched him work, noting the concentration in his face, the careful way he handled her injuries as if they mattered. "Why did you leave your people?" she asked suddenly. "You said you were scouting, but surely that doesn't require traveling so far alone." Joseph's hands stilled for a moment. Sometimes a man needs solitude to think, to decide. He resumed wrapping her feet with fresh cloth torn from his own shirt. "My band wants to fight. Young warriors talk of joining Victorio. making war. Others say we should go to reservation, try to live in peace. Both paths lead to death, just different kinds. And you? What do you think? I think the world is changing faster than we can run from it, Joseph said quietly. I think maybe there's another way, but I don't know what it is yet. He finished with her feet and sat back on his heels. Sometimes answers come when you stop looking so hard for them. They rested through the worst heat of the day, sharing water and the last of the dried meat. Clara found herself telling him about her life before Samuel, her parents' small farm in Ohio, the books her mother had treasured, the dreams she'd had of becoming a teacher before fever changed everything. You could still teach, Joseph suggested. Many frontier towns need teachers. Children don't care about your past, only if you're kind and know your letters. A widow with no references, no family. Clara shook her head. Schools want respectable women. Respectability. Joseph said the word like it tasted bitter. White man's concept that means nothing. Are you a good person? Do you help others? That's what matters. As afternoon shadows lengthened, they prepared to move again. Joseph had found a walking stick for Clara, and she discovered that moving on foot, despite her sore feet, was actually easier than riding for long stretches. They were following a game trail through thick brush when Joseph suddenly stopped, holding up his hand for silence. Clara froze, straining to hear whatever had alerted him. Then she heard it too, voices, rough with drink and cruel laughter. Through the brush, she glimpsed them, 4 men making camp beside the trail. Her blood ran cold as she recognized the youngest, the bandit who'd leered at her during the stagecoach robbery. Should have brought that pretty widow along, he was saying. Bet she'd have fetched good money in Mexico. You think with the wrong head, boy, another replied. Besides, boss said no complications. Joseph touched Clara's arm, guiding her silently backward. They retreated into a thick stand of juniper, the painted horse following with surprising quiet. Clara's pulse thundered in her ears as they crouched in the shadows. We go around, Joseph whispered, his breath warm against her ear. Move slow, quiet. They began circling the bandits' camp, placing each foot with agonizing care. Clara had never been so aware of every snapping twig, every rustling leaf. The walking stick that had been helpful now seemed like a liability, but she clutched it tightly, ready to use it as a weapon if needed. They were nearly past when the horse stepped on a dry branch. The crack sounded like a gunshot in the still air. What was that? One of the bandits stood, hand on his pistol. Probably deer, another said lazily. But the young one was already moving toward their position. Joseph pushed Clara behind him, his hand going to his knife. She felt his body coil like a spring, ready for violence. The bandit came closer, pushing through the brush, so near she could smell the whiskey and sweat on him. Then, miraculously, a deer burst from cover just yards away, bounding through the camp and scattering the outlaws' supplies. The men shouted and laughed, the young bandit turning to give chase. See, just a deer, someone called. Sit down before you hurt yourself, boy. Joseph and Clara remained frozen until the bandits settled back around their fire, passing a bottle and arguing over cards. Then, moving like ghosts, they slipped away into the gathering dusk. They didn't stop until full darkness had fallen and they'd put miles between themselves and the outlaws. Joseph finally led them into a protected hollow in the rocks, barely large enough for the 3 of them, Clara, himself, and the horse. No fire tonight, he said quietly. Too many eyes in these hills. They made a cold camp, sharing water and some dried berries Joseph had gathered during their travels. Clara pulled her shawl tighter against the desert chill, trying not to shiver. Without a word, Joseph moved closer, offering his own warmth. Clara tensed for a moment, then gradually relaxed against his solid presence. They sat in silence, shoulders touching, sharing heat as the stars emerged overhead. I was terrified, Clara admitted quietly. When I saw him, the one from the robbery, I couldn't move, couldn't think. Fear is wise when danger is real. Joseph replied, but you didn't panic, stayed quiet, stayed smart. That's what kept us safe. You kept us safe. Clara corrected. I just tried not to get us killed. She felt rather than heard his soft chuckle. Sometimes that's the best anyone can do. A coyote called in the distance, answered by another. The desert night sounds that had terrified Clara just days ago now seemed almost comforting, proof that the natural world continued its ancient rhythms despite human conflicts. Joseph, she said into the darkness, what will happen when we reach the trading post? He was quiet for a long moment. You'll be safe, can rest, decide your path. The trader, McBride, he's fair man. His Apache wife, Maria, she's kind. They'll help you. And you? I continue to the mountains. My people need to know about the patrols, the unrest. Clara felt something sink in her chest. Of course, she'd known their time together was temporary, that he had obligations beyond helping one lost white woman. Still, the thought of parting felt like contemplating another kind of death. I see, she managed. Joseph shifted slightly, and she felt his hand cover hers where it rested on her knee. The touch was light, hesitant, ready to withdraw at any sign of distress from her. Clara, he said, and it was the first time he'd used her name. These days, they've been... A sound in the darkness cut him off, horses approaching fast. Joseph was on his feet instantly, knife in hand, pushing Clara deeper into the rocky shelter. But the riders passed by without slowing, their urgent pace suggesting business elsewhere. Joseph remained alert long after the hoofbeats faded, his body a protective barrier between Clara and the night. When he finally relaxed enough to sit again, the moment for words had passed, but his hand found hers again in the darkness, and this time, Clara turned her palm up to meet his. They sat that way through the long night, hands clasped, drawing strength and comfort from that simple connection. Neither slept much. The danger was too near, the night too full of threats, but somehow, Clara had never felt safer. The man beside her had faced down her fears with steady courage, had shown her kindness when the world had taught her to expect only cruelty. As dawn began to gray the eastern sky, Clara made a decision. Whatever came next, trading post, ranch, or destinations yet unknown, she would face it as the woman Joseph had helped her remember she could be, strong, capable, worthy of kindness and respect. Thank you, she whispered as the first birds began their morning songs. Joseph squeezed her hand gently. Journey's not over yet, he reminded her, but she heard the warmth in his voice, the promise that he would see her safely through whatever lay ahead. The new day brought new dangers, new decisions to make, but for this moment, sitting in their small shelter with their hands entwined and the desert awakening around them, Clara felt something she'd thought lost forever, hope. The sandstorm struck without warning on their third day together. One moment the sky was clear, the next a wall of red dust was racing across the desert floor toward them like an avalanche of earth and wind. Joseph had been watching the horizon with growing concern all morning, noting the strange yellowish tinge to the air. Storm coming, he said tersely, urging the horse to a faster pace. Big one. Need shelter now. Clara pulled her shawl over her nose and mouth as the first stinging particles reached them. The wind rose from a whisper to a howl in minutes, and soon she could barely see Joseph's back, though he was only feet ahead. The painted horse whinnied nervously, tossing its head against the blinding grit. Joseph led them off the main trail, following some internal compass Clara couldn't fathom. She trusted him completely now, following blind through the growing maelstrom. Her eyes burned and teared, and every exposed inch of skin felt scoured raw, just when she thought they would be consumed by the storm. Joseph pulled her from the saddle and into a narrow opening in the rock face. They stumbled through darkness, leading the terrified horse, until the passage opened into a cave. The sudden cessation of wind was almost shocking. Apache place, Joseph explained, his voice hoarse from the dust. Old shelter, used for generations. As her eyes adjusted, Clara could make out faded paintings on the walls, figures of men and animals, suns and moons, Symbols she couldn't interpret. Someone had stacked dried brush near the entrance, and the remains of an old fire circle marked the center of the floor. Joseph quickly built a small fire while Clara tended to the horse, trying to calm the frightened animal. Outside, the storm raged like a living thing, turning day into an eerie twilight. The cave mouth howled with wind, but they were safe in the depths. "How long will it last?" Clara asked, settling near the fire. Her hair was full of grit despite her shawl, and her skin felt raw. Maybe hours, maybe days. Joseph handed her a water skin. "Drink small. Rinse mouth first. Spit out the mud." They made themselves as comfortable as possible on the sandy floor. Joseph had salvaged some supplies from his saddlebags. A little dried meat, some cornmeal, precious water. Not much if the storm lasted days, but Clara had learned not to borrow worry from tomorrow. As the hours passed, the enforced intimacy of their shelter broke down the last walls of formality between them. They talked to pass the time, sharing stories with the easy rhythm of old friends. Joseph spoke of his childhood, of learning to read the desert's moods, of the old ways that were disappearing like smoke. "My grandmother," he said, stirring the small fire with a stick. "She could predict storms by watching ants, said they always know when to move their eggs to higher ground. I used to think it was magic. Now I think maybe ants are just smarter than men." Clara found herself laughing, really laughing, for the first time in years. "My mother claimed she could predict rain by the ache in her knees. I thought that was magic too. Until I got older and my own joints started complaining. Bodies remember things." Joseph agreed. Scars ache before storms. Old wounds speak when weather changes. He looked at her meaningfully. "Inside wounds too, sometimes." Clara understood what he was asking. In the gentle darkness of the cave, with the storm sealing them away from the world, she found herself able to speak of things she'd never voiced before. "Samuel wasn't always cruel," she said quietly. "The first months, he was, if not kind, at least civil. But when I couldn't give him children, something changed. He started drinking more, started blaming me for his failures. The farm was struggling, debts mounting, and somehow it all became my fault." Joseph listened without interrupting, his dark eyes never leaving her face. "The first time he hit me," Clara continued, her voice steady despite the memories. "I was so shocked I couldn't even cry. I'd burned the biscuits, such a small thing. But he backhanded me across the kitchen, and I just stood there, holding my face, trying to understand how my life had become this. It grew worse," Joseph said, not a question. "Yes, always careful not to leave marks where others might see. Always sorry afterward. At first, then not even that, just anger and fists and—" She stopped, unable to continue. Joseph moved closer, not touching but offering his presence like a shield against the memories. "You survived. That takes more courage than any warrior's deeds." "I used to pray for him to die," Clara admitted, the confession burning her throat. "Every night, I'd lie there listening to him snore, drunk again, and pray that God would strike him down. And then I'd pray for forgiveness for such evil thoughts. But I never stopped wishing it. Natural to wish for freedom from pain," Joseph said softly. "No evil in wanting to live without fear." The fire crackled between them, casting dancing shadows on the ancient paintings. Outside, the storm continued its assault on the desert. But inside their shelter, a different kind of storm was passing. The tempest of old pain finally given voice. Clara found herself studying Joseph's profile in the firelight, the strong lines of his face, the quiet strength in his bearing, the gentle way he'd tended her wounds. Everything about him was the antithesis of Samuel's crude violence. "What about you?" she asked. Was there someone special?" A shadow crossed Joseph's features. "There was a woman, Dawn Singer, from our band. We were to marry, but the soldiers came before. She died of the sickness they brought to the reservation. Many died that winter." "I'm sorry," Clara whispered. "Long time ago now. But yes, the body remembers. The heart, too." He met her gaze. I thought that part of me died with her. Easier to be alone. No risk of such pain again. And now? The question slipped out before Clara could stop it. Joseph was quiet for a long moment, the fire reflecting in his dark eyes. Now I think maybe the heart can surprise us. Maybe it's stronger than we know. The weight of his words settled over them like a blanket. Clara felt her pulse quicken, awareness of him flooding through her. They were sitting close enough that she could feel his warmth, smell the sage and wood smoke scent of him. "Joseph," she began, not sure what she wanted to say, only knowing that something had shifted between them. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and touched her face where Samuel's fist had left its last mark. His fingers were calloused, but infinitely gentle, tracing the faded bruise with something like reverence. "He tried to break you," Joseph said quietly. "But you're still here, still strong, still beautiful." Clara's breath caught. No one had ever called her beautiful. Not like that, not with such simple honesty. Samuel had wanted to possess her beauty, to cage it. Joseph seemed to see it as something that simply was, like sunrise or starlight. Without conscious thought, she leaned into his touch. His hand cupped her cheek, thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. The storm outside seemed very far away. "Clara," he whispered her name like a prayer. "I didn't expect, didn't plan, neither did I," she admitted. "But Joseph, these days with you, I've felt more alive, more myself than I have in years. You've shown me I can be whole again." He leaned forward slowly, giving her every chance to retreat. But Clara didn't want to retreat anymore. She met him halfway, their lips touching in a kiss that was gentle as morning rain. Joseph's arms came around her, holding her as if she were something precious and fragile, and Clara melted into his embrace. When they finally parted, both were trembling. Joseph rested his forehead against hers, his breathing unsteady. "I should not," he said roughly. "You're under my protection. It's not honorable." Clara silenced him with another kiss, shorter but no less sweet. "You gave me back my freedom to choose," she said. "This is my choice." They held each other as the storm raged on, sharing warmth and comfort and the tentative beginnings of something neither had expected to find. Clara dozed in Joseph's arms, feeling safer than she had since childhood. He stayed awake, keeping watch, one hand gentle in her dusty hair. The storm lasted through the night and into the next day. They passed the time talking, planning, and simply being together. Joseph taught her words in Apache: water, fire, horse, friend. She told him about books she'd loved, dreams she'd abandoned, hopes she was beginning to reclaim. "When this is over," Joseph said during a lull in the wind, "when you're safe at trading post, what then?" Clara had been thinking about the same question. "I don't know," she admitted. "A few days ago, I just wanted to survive, to get far from Wyoming and all its memories. But now..." "Now?" She looked at him directly. "Now I can't imagine saying goodbye to you." Joseph's expression was torn between joy and sorrow. "My life is uncertain. My people hunted, scattered. I can offer you nothing but danger and hardship. You've offered me kindness, protection, and respect." Clara countered. "You've shown me I'm worth more than bruises and harsh words." "That seems like everything to me." "The world won't understand," he warned. "White woman with Apache man, both sides will hate us. Then we'll make our own side." Clara said firmly, "Find our own place. The frontier is vast, and there must be somewhere two people can build a life based on love instead of hate." Joseph pulled her close again, and she felt his chest rise with a deep sigh. "You make me believe impossible things." "Clara Whitfield." "Good," she murmured against his shoulder, "because I've learned that sometimes impossible things are the only ones worth fighting for." As the second night fell, the storm finally began to weaken. The howling wind dropped to a moan, then to whispers. Joseph ventured to the cave mouth and reported that the worst had passed. "By morning, we can travel," he said. "Trading post is maybe half day's ride if trails are clear." Clara nodded, But inside she felt a pang of loss. Their magical isolation was ending. Soon they would have to face the real world again, with all its prejudices and dangers. But as Joseph settled beside her again, taking her hand in his, she found her courage returning. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The storm had forced them to shelter in place, but it had also given them the gift of time. Time to know each other, to trust, to discover that two wounded hearts could indeed find healing in each other's care. As she drifted toward sleep on their last night in the cave, Clara smiled. She'd begun this journey running from a nightmare. Now she was running toward a dream, uncertain, perhaps impossible, but shimmering with hope like the desert after rain. The desert after the storm was a transformed world, where before there had been only dust and thorns. Now tiny flowers pushed through the sand, their petals brilliant against the red earth. The air smelled clean and new, washed by wind and the brief rain that had followed the dust. Joseph and Clara emerged from their shelter at dawn, blinking in the sudden brightness. The painted horse nickered softly, eager to be moving after the long confinement. As Joseph checked their supplies and prepared for travel, Clara took a last look at the cave that had been their sanctuary. "Ready?" Joseph asked, helping her mount. "Yes," Clara said, though her heart was heavy. Each mile now brought them closer to the trading post and the decisions that waited there. They traveled through a landscape made strange by the storm. Familiar landmarks had shifted, dunes relocated, new channels carved by flash floods. Joseph navigated with the sureness of one who read the land like others read books, adjusting their path as needed. By mid-morning, they were crossing a field of barrel cacti and ocotillo when Joseph suddenly reined in the horse. Ahead, vultures circled lazily in the crystal sky. "Death," he said simply. "Recent." They approached cautiously, and Clara's stomach turned at what they found. 3 bodies lay sprawled near the remains of a wagon, travelers caught in the storm, by the look of it. But as Joseph dismounted to investigate, his face darkened. "Not the storm," he said grimly. "Bullets. Someone killed them and made it look like storm damage." Clara recognized the pattern of violence even from horseback, the way the bodies were arranged, the scattered belongings picked through for valuables. Bandits? Maybe, or maybe men who just take what they want because they can. Joseph's voice was hard. "White men killing white men, then they blame Apache to justify more patrols." Among the wreckage, something moved. Joseph approached carefully, then called out, "Clara, come, survivor." She slid from the saddle and hurried over. A young man, barely more than a boy, lay partially sheltered by the overturned wagon. Blood seeped from a wound in his side, and his breathing was shallow. His eyes, when they fluttered open, were glazed with pain and fever. "Please," he whispered. "Water." Without hesitation, Clara knelt beside him, supporting his head while Joseph brought the water skin. As the boy drank, she could see he wouldn't last long without help. "We need to get him somewhere safe," she said, looking up at Joseph. "He'll die out here." Joseph's expression was conflicted. "Trading post has doctor sometimes, but moving him could kill him faster. We have to try." Clara was already tearing strips from her petticoat for bandages. "I won't leave him to die alone." The boy, he mumbled his name was Thomas, cried out as they carefully loaded him onto the horse. Clara walked beside him, steadying him, while Joseph led on foot. Progress was agonizingly slow, and more than once, Thomas's breathing became so shallow, Clara feared they were carrying a corpse. "Why help me?" Thomas asked during one of his lucid moments. "I'm nobody, just hired hand." "Because you're somebody to somebody," Clara said firmly. "And because it's right." Joseph glanced back at her with something like pride in his eyes. They were navigating a narrow canyon when they heard horses approaching fast. Joseph immediately began looking for cover, but with Thomas on the horse and Clara on foot, there was no time to hide. "Stay calm," he told Clara quietly. "Let me talk." 5 riders rounded the bend, hard-faced men wearing no uniforms but carrying themselves with military bearing. "Bounty hunters," Clara realized with a chill. The kind who collected Apache scalps for Mexican gold. The leader, a man with pale eyes and a scar across his throat, sized up their small party with predatory interest. His gaze lingered on Joseph, noting the Apache dress, the weapon at his side. Well, Scarred Throat said. What have we here? Apache buck traveling with a white woman and wounded boy. That's an interesting combination. The woman and boy were attacked, Joseph said evenly. I'm taking them to the trading post for help. That's so? Another rider, younger with a mean grin, circled them slowly. Funny how there's always Apache around when white folks get hurt. We found him like this, Clara interjected, moving protectively closer to Thomas. Joseph saved both our lives. We were caught in the storm. Joseph? Scarred Throat laughed unpleasantly. Got yourself a Christian name? How civilized. His hand rested casually on his pistol. Here's what I think happened. You and your war party hit these folks, took this woman captive. Boy, they probably tried to play hero. That's not true, Clara said hotly. I've been traveling with Joseph for days. He's protected me, helped me. Ma'am, you don't need to lie anymore, the younger hunter interrupted with false sympathy. Stockholm Syndrome, they call it. When captives start thinking their captors are heroes, we'll take care of you now. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. Clara could see the hunters were already counting their bounty money. Joseph stood perfectly still, but she recognized the coiled readiness in his posture. I demand you let us pass, Clara said, drawing herself up with all the authority she could muster. This man is under my protection, and this boy needs medical attention immediately. Scarred Throat dismounted, his spurs ringing in the canyon silence. Under your protection. Lady, you're confused, but don't worry, we'll sort this out. He gestured to his men. Take the Apache. We'll let the authorities decide what happened here. No, Clara stepped directly in front of Joseph. You'll have to go through me. Clara, don't, Joseph said quietly. Take the boy and go. I'm not leaving you. The tableau held for a tense moment, Clara defiant. Joseph ready to fight. The hunters poised for violence. Then Thomas, delirious with fever, provided unexpected intervention. Apache saved us, he gasped out, struggling to sit up. Saw it all. Bandits hit our wagon. Same ones hit the stage 3 days back. Young one with mean eyes. Apache found us after. Helped. The hunters exchanged glances. This complicated their simple narrative. Boys fevered, Scarred Throat said. But uncertainty had crept into his voice. Don't know what he's saying. He knows exactly what he's saying. Clara seized the moment. And when he recovers, he'll testify to it. Do you want to be known as the men who murdered an innocent man and let the real killers go free? Because I assure you, I'll make certain everyone from here to San Francisco knows your names. It was a bluff. She didn't even know their names, but delivered with such conviction that the hunters hesitated. In that moment of doubt, the sound of more horses echoed through the canyon. A patrol of actual cavalry appeared, led by a young lieutenant who looked harassed and trail-worn. What's happening here? The officer demanded. Taking in the scene, everyone started talking at once. Clara's clear voice cut through the babble. Lieutenant, this wounded boy needs immediate medical attention. We were trying to reach the trading post when these men detained us. The lieutenant, barely old enough for his bars, looked between the various parties with visible frustration. Sergeant, check the boy's wounds. You men, he addressed the hunters. I'll need to see your bounty licenses. While the hunters produced their papers with ill grace, the sergeant examined Thomas. Gunshot wound? Sir, day or two old. Boy's in bad shape. We're taking him to the post. The lieutenant decided, all of you can come along and sort this out there. That includes you. He added to Joseph. It wasn't ideal, but it was better than leaving Joseph to the bounty hunters. They formed an awkward procession. Soldiers, hunters, and their small party. Clara walked beside Joseph, their hands not quite touching but close enough to offer silent support. Should have let them take me, Joseph murmured. Now you're involved with authorities. I was already involved the day you saved my life. Clara replied quietly, "We're in this together. Remember?" They reached McBride's trading post as the afternoon sun slanted low. It was a modest collection of buildings, store, stable, living quarters, surrounded by an adobe wall. The site of civilization, such as it was, brought both relief and apprehension. James McBride himself emerged to greet them, a weathered Scotsman with shrewd eyes and graying red hair. His Apache wife, Maria, appeared beside him, her gaze immediately finding Joseph and reading the situation. "Lieutenant Patterson," McBride nodded to the officer. "What brings half the territory to my door?" As the lieutenant began explaining. Clara and Maria worked together to get Thomas inside and onto a bed. The trading post had a small room set aside for medical needs, and Maria proved skilled with herbs and healing. "He might live," Maria pronounced after examination, "if the fever breaks." She looked at Clara with knowing eyes. "You traveled with my cousin's son. I see his protection on you." Clara wasn't sure what that meant, but she nodded. "He saved my life. Now they want to arrest him for it. White man's justice," Maria said with bitter familiarity. "Come, we make you presentable. Then you tell your story with strength." An hour later, Clara emerged transformed. Maria had helped her wash, found her a clean dress, and pinned up her hair properly. She looked every inch the respectable widow, except for the steel in her spine and the determination in her eyes. The informal hearing was held in McBride's main room. The lieutenant, clearly out of his depth, tried to maintain military protocol while the bounty hunters pushed for Joseph's arrest, and McBride provided pointed commentary on territorial law. Clara told her story clearly and without embellishment. The stagecoach robbery, her flight into the desert, Joseph's rescue and protection. Thomas, propped up and dosed with Maria's medicines, corroborated what he could remember. "The Apache helped us," he insisted weakly. "Saw him chase off coyotes from Pa's body. Gentle with the dead. Bandits were white men, I swear it." The bounty hunters argued, but their position was weakening. Without clear evidence of wrongdoing, and with 2 white witnesses defending him, they couldn't simply take Joseph for the bounty. Finally, the lieutenant made his decision. "I see no evidence of criminal activity by this Apache. However," he added, looking at Joseph, "I strongly suggest you return to your people immediately. These territories are becoming dangerous for Indians traveling alone." It was a dismissal and a warning combined. Joseph inclined his head slightly in acknowledgement. As the soldiers and hunters departed, the latter with visible reluctance, Clara felt both relief and a new kind of fear. The immediate danger had passed, but now came the harder part, deciding what happened next. McBride, who'd watched the proceedings with interest, approached them. "You two need a place for the night. I'm thinking Maria's already making up rooms. Separate rooms," he added with a meaningful look. "Proprieties to maintain." But as Clara met Joseph's eyes across the room, she knew that propriety was the least of her concerns now. They'd survived storms and soldiers, bandits and bounty hunters. The question now was whether what they'd found in each other could survive the return to civilization, such as it was. Outside, the sun set in spectacular fashion, painting the desert in shades of fire. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new choices to make. But tonight, they were safe. They were together. And for now, that was enough. The town of Cedar Ridge sprawled across the valley like a dust-covered snake, its single main street lined with false-fronted buildings that promised more civilization than they delivered. Joseph and Clara approached on foot, having left the painted horse hidden in a grove of cottonwoods outside town. It had been Maria McBride's idea. Arriving on foot would attract less attention than an Apache warrior on horseback. Clara wore the respectable dress Maria had given her, complete with proper bonnet and gloves. Joseph had reluctantly changed into white man's clothing, canvas pants, cotton shirt, and a worn hat that shadowed his features. But nothing could disguise his bearing or the proud set of his shoulders. "Remember?" Clara murmured as they neared the first buildings. "We're travelers seeking supplies, nothing more. Joseph nodded, though his discomfort was evident. The clothes seemed to constrain him, and his hand kept moving to where his knife should be. They'd left the trading post 3 days prior, after Thomas had stabilized enough to travel with a freight wagon heading to California. The boy had gripped Joseph's hand with tears in his eyes, promising to tell everyone how an Apache had saved his life. It was a small thing, perhaps, but in a world of mounting hatred, small things mattered. The first test came at the general store. The proprietor, a narrow-faced man named Garrett, looked up from his ledger as they entered. His expression soured immediately upon seeing Joseph. "We don't serve Indians here," he said flatly. "He's with me," Clara said, stepping forward with the authority of a woman used to being obeyed. "We need supplies, flour, salt, ammunition. I'll pay in cash." Garrett's eyes flicked between them, taking in Clara's respectable appearance and Joseph's obvious heritage. "You as prisoner, ma'am. Blink twice if you need help." Clara felt Joseph tense beside her. She laughed, the sound sharp as breaking glass. "Mr. Garrett, I am no one's prisoner. This man is my guide and protector. Now, will you take my money? Or shall I inform everyone that you turn away paying customers based on ignorance?" The threat of lost revenue warred with prejudice on Garrett's pinched features. Greed won. "List what you need," he muttered. As Clara conducted their business, she was aware of Joseph standing perfectly still by the door, enduring the stares of other customers. A woman clutched her child closer. A man rested his hand on his sidearm. The very air seemed charged with suspicion and fear. They were almost finished when trouble walked through the door in the form of 3 townsmen, whiskey-bowled and looking for entertainment. The largest, a brute named Hutchins with fists like hams, immediately zeroed in on Joseph. Well, what's this? Apache brave playing dress-up? "We're just leaving," Clara said quickly, gathering their purchases. But Hutchins blocked their path. "Not so fast, little lady. You don't look like the type to take up with savages. This boy forcing you somehow? The only force here is your breath," Clara retorted. "Stand aside." Hutchins' face reddened. "Watch your tongue. Woman, ain't proper. You defending this redskin?" Joseph spoke for the first time, his voice calm but carrying an edge. "The lady asked you to move. Be wise and listen." "He speaks." One of Hutchins's companions laughed. "Monkey see, monkey do. Bet you learned that at some missionary school before you went back to scalping settlers." The tension ratcheted higher. Clara could feel violence hovering like a thundercloud. She moved closer to Joseph, her hand finding his arm. "We're leaving," she said firmly. "Now." "Not with him, you ain't." Hutchins grabbed for Clara's wrist. Joseph moved like lightning. His hand caught Hutchins's arm, twisting it away from Clara with controlled force. The bigger man yelped and swung with his free hand, but Joseph was already moving, using Hutchins's momentum to send him crashing into a display of canned goods. "Apache bastard!" Hutchins roared, struggling to his feet. Before the situation could escalate further, the sharp crack of a rifle shot froze everyone in place. In the doorway stood a small woman with steel-gray hair and fierce eyes, a smoking Henry rifle in her capable hands. "That's quite enough," she announced. "Hutchins, pick yourself up and get out before I put the next shot somewhere more personal. The rest of you, mind your own business." The woman, who Clara would learn was Mrs. Eleanor Bradford, widow and owner of the boarding house, surveyed the scene with disgust. "Grown men acting like rabid dogs. Shameful!" Hutchins and his cronies slunk out, muttering threats, misses. Bradford lowered her rifle and fixed her sharp gaze on Clara and Joseph. "You two, come with me. This town's about to get unfriendly for you." They followed her to a neat clapboard house at the edge of town. Once inside, Mrs. Bradford set her rifle by the door and turned to face them. "I heard about you from McBride's trading post," she said bluntly. "Apache who saved a white woman and wounded boy. That true?" "Yes, ma'am," Clara replied. Mrs. Bradford studied Joseph with eyes that had seen too much. My husband died in the Mexican War. Senseless waste. Since then, I've had little patience for men who confuse violence with virtue." She paused. "You planning to stay in Cedar Ridge?" "We're looking for somewhere safe," Clara said carefully. "Somewhere we can build a life without people trying to kill you for existing." Mrs. Bradford finished. "Girl, you're traveling with an Apache man. There is no safe for you in any town from here to the Pacific." The blunt words hit Clara like cold water. She'd known, of course, but hearing it stated so plainly made it real. "However," Mrs. Bradford continued, "I might know of something. My nephew has a ranch about 40 miles north. Remote place, backs up to the mountains. He lost his wife to fever last year. Could use help. More importantly, he's got a Mexicano foreman and Chinese cook. Man who's already crossing color lines, might not balk at one more." Hope flickered in Clara's chest. "Would he? I'll write you a letter of introduction." "Mrs. Bradford interrupted. "But understand this, even there, you'll face challenges. The world isn't ready for what you two represent." As Mrs. Bradford wrote the letter, Clara and Joseph stepped onto the porch. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. In the distance, they could hear angry voices from the town, word of the confrontation spreading. "We should leave tonight," Joseph said quietly. Clara nodded, though her heart was heavy. Every town would be like this or worse. Every day would bring new threats, new hatred. Was love? For that's what this was becoming, she admitted to herself, worth a lifetime of running, as if reading her thoughts. Joseph turned to face her. "Clara, you can still choose differently. Find a town where no one knows you. Start fresh. Marry a respectable man. Have the life you were meant for." "The life I was meant for?" Clara's voice rose. "You mean married to someone like Samuel, beaten and broken and pretending everything was fine? That life?" "A safe life," Joseph insisted, though the words clearly pained him. "A normal life. I don't want normal if normal means living a lie," Clara said fiercely. "I want truth. I want kindness. I want—" She stopped, suddenly shy. "What do you want?" Joseph asked softly, stepping closer. "You," Clara whispered. "I want you, despite everything, because of everything. I want the man who gave me water in the desert and medicine for my feet, who protected me from storms and soldiers and my own fears, who sees me as a person, not property." Joseph's control finally cracked. He pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she might disappear. "Clara, my heart, you humble me. But the path ahead, we'll walk it together," Clara said against his shoulder. "Whatever comes." They were interrupted by Mrs. Bradford clearing her throat. "Touching as this is, you need to move. Hutchins is rallying his friends at the saloon. They'll come looking soon." She handed Clara the sealed letter and a small purse. "Consider it an investment in hope," she said gruffly when Clara protested. "Now go, before I have to shoot someone and ruin my reputation as a respectable widow." They left Cedar Ridge in darkness, retrieving the horse and riding hard through the night. Behind them, torches gathered in the town, a mob forming too late to catch their quarry. Joseph navigated by starlight, choosing paths that would confuse pursuit. As dawn broke, they paused at a high ridge overlooking the valley. Cedar Ridge was a distant smudge, and ahead rose the mountains that promised either sanctuary or just another form of exile. "No regrets?" Joseph asked, helping Clara dismount. She looked at him, this man who'd become everything to her in a handful of days, and smiled. "None? You?" "Only that I didn't meet you sooner," he replied, "when we both had less pain to carry. Maybe we needed the pain," Clara said thoughtfully, "to recognize the healing when it came." They shared water and the last of their food, watching the sun climb higher. Somewhere ahead was the nephew's ranch and an uncertain welcome. Beyond that, who knew? But Clara found she no longer feared the unknown. She'd faced the worst life could offer and survived. Now she had the chance for something better, not perfect, perhaps, but real and true and hers. "Ready?" Joseph asked, preparing to remount. Clara took a last look at the town that had rejected them, then turned her face toward the mountains and possibility. Ready? As they rode on, she heard him singing softly in Apache, a traveling song. He'd told her once about finding home in unexpected places. She didn't understand all the words yet, but she understood the sentiment. Home wasn't a place. It was a choice, a person, a willingness to fight for love in a world that preferred hate. And as the painted horse carried them toward whatever future waited, Clara knew she'd found hers at last. The small cabin sat nestled against a hillside where a clear stream bubbled over smooth stones. Joseph had built it with his own hands over the past 2 seasons, choosing the spot for its shelter from winter winds and proximity to water. The walls were sturdy logs chinked with mud, the roof tight with wooden shingles. It wasn't grand, but it was theirs. Clara stood in the doorway, watching the sunset paint the valley in shades of gold and crimson. 3 years had passed since that desperate flight across the desert. 3 years of building a life together on the margins of 2 worlds. The Bradford nephews' ranch had provided refuge for a time, but eventually, they'd saved enough to claim this small piece of land where no one questioned their right to exist together. "The miller's wagon is coming," Joseph said, joining her in the doorway. His sharp eyes had spotted the dust plume long before she could see it. Clara smiled. "Mary said she'd bring fabric from town. I promised to teach her the beading technique Maria showed me." It was a small thing, neighboring women trading skills and gossip, but it represented so much more. Slowly, carefully, they'd built relationships with the scattered homesteaders in the valley. Not everyone accepted them, but enough did to create a fragile community. Joseph's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining with the ease of long practice. His wedding band, a simple silver circle Clara had commissioned from a Mexican silversmith, caught the dying light. They'd married in their own way, with Maria McBride officiating and the mountains as witness. No church would have performed the ceremony, but Clara had never felt more married than when Joseph had spoken his vows in both Apache and English under the vast sky. The miller's wagon pulled up, and 8-year-old Sarah jumped down before it had fully stopped. "Mrs. Clara, Mr. Joseph, Ma brought the fabric, and Pa has news from town." Tom Miller climbed down more slowly, his weathered face serious. "Joseph, Clara, good to see you both." "What news?" Joseph asked, reading the tension in Tom's bearing. "There's been trouble down south. Apache raids in response to the army breaking another treaty. Folks in town are getting stirred up, talking about Indian menace." Tom spat tobacco juice, his disgust clear. Same folks who cheered when prospectors violated the reservation boundaries. Of course. Mary Miller touched her husband's arm. "Tom, not in front of Sarah. The child should know the world she's growing in." Tom replied, but he changed the subject. "Anyway, thought you should know. Might be wise to lay low for a bit." They shared a meal together, the conversation carefully skirting the darker news. Sarah chattered about her lessons, showing off her reading to Clara, who had been helping with her education. The normalcy of it, sharing food with neighbors, discussing crops and weather, was a balm against the outside world's hostility. After the Millers left, Clara and Joseph sat by their own fire, the weight of Tom's news settling over them. These periods came like storms, times when the violence elsewhere made their peaceful existence precarious. "Maybe we should move further north," Clara said quietly. "Oregon Territory, or even Canada." "Running forever?" Joseph interrupted gently. "We tried that. Here, we have land, friends, a life. Should we abandon it every time fear rises?" Clara leaned against his shoulder. "I just don't want to lose what we've built. Don't want to lose you." "You won't," Joseph promised. "We've survived worse than whispers and fear." The next weeks proved tense but manageable. They kept to their property more, Joseph avoiding town entirely while Clara made necessary trips with the Millers. Then came the night when everything changed. Clara woke to the smell of smoke and the sound of horses. Joseph was already up, rifle in hand, peering through the window. "How many?" Clara whispered. reaching for the shotgun they kept loaded by the door. 6, maybe 7, not soldiers, vigilantes by the look of them. Their worst nightmare. A mob come to dispense what they called justice. Clara's hands trembled as she checked her ammunition. All their precautions, all their careful relationship building, and still hatred had found them. "Clara Whitfield," a voice bellowed from the darkness. "We know you're in there with that savage. Come out now, and we'll let you leave unharmed. It's him we want." Clara recognized the voice. Jim Hutchins, the brute from Cedar Ridge. He'd tracked them down after 3 years, nursing his grudge like a poisonous plant. "You need to go," Joseph said urgently. "Take the horse. Ride to the Millers." "No." Clara's voice was steel. "We stand together or not at all. They'll kill you too. Then that's how it ends." She moved to the window on the opposite side. "But I don't think we're dying tonight." Joseph looked at her, his warrior woman, fierce and unafraid, and nodded. "What do you see?" "Fear," Clara said. "They're scared. Joseph, of you, of us, of what we represent. Scared men make mistakes." She was right. The vigilantes were nervous, milling about uncertainly. They'd expected to find a cowed woman and a savage. Instead, they faced a fortified position and 2 people willing to fight. "Last chance, woman," Hutchins called. "Don't die for a redskin." Clara's response was to fire her shotgun over their heads. "He saved my life, you coward! I stood before you once and declared my choice. Nothing's changed except now I'm armed." The blast echoed across the valley. In the distance, Clara heard what she'd hoped for, answering gunshots. The frontier had its own code, and gunfire in the night meant neighbors needed help. "You hear that?" she called to the vigilantes. "That's Tom Miller and his boys. Behind them will be the Johnsons and the Kowalskis. You want to explain to them why you're attacking peaceful neighbors in the night." The vigilantes stirred uneasily. They'd expected an isolated target, not a community response. Joseph fired once, his shot precisely placed to splinter wood near Hutchins's head. "I could have killed you," he called out. "Still can, but we want no bloodshed. Leave now. Don't come back." For long minutes, the standoff held. Then lanterns appeared on the ridge, the Millers and others, coming as Clara had predicted. Faced with witnesses and resistance, the mob's courage failed. "This ain't over," Hutchins snarled, but he was already backing toward his horse. "Yes, it is." Tom Miller's voice carried across the darkness. He and his sons sat their horses with rifles prominent. "You're trespassing on private property, threatening lawful citizens. Sheriff Campbell will hear about this." One by one, the vigilantes melted away into the night. The neighbors stayed until dawn, keeping watch, sharing coffee and quiet conversation. Mrs. Johnson, a severe woman who'd never spoken to them before, pressed Clara's hand. "Took courage, what you did," she said simply. "My grandmother was Choctaw. I know what it costs to stand tall." As the sun rose, Joseph and Clara stood among their neighbors, not friends, perhaps, but people who'd chosen justice over mob rule. It wasn't everything, but it was enough. Later, as they repaired the damage to their fence and checked their animals, Clara found herself thinking about that night in the desert years ago. She'd been so broken then, so certain she had nothing left to offer the world. "Do you remember?" she asked Joseph. "That first night by the spring, when I said I couldn't imagine living alone with respect?" Joseph smiled, pulling her close. "I remember everything about those days. You were like a wounded hawk, fierce even in your pain. I was terrified," Clara admitted. "When I saw you on that rise, I was certain my life was over. I screamed at you not to touch me, and you just stopped, set down your weapons, offered water." She laughed softly. "That scream saved my life in ways I couldn't imagine, and changed mine," Joseph said. "I thought I was just helping a lost traveler. Instead, I found my heart." They stood together in their doorway, looking out at the land they'd claimed through work and courage and love. The stream sang its eternal song. Gardens waited for spring planting. Smoke rose from chimneys across the valley where other families built their own dreams. Was it worth it? Clara asked. All the hardship, the danger, the ones who hate us? Joseph turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. Every moment, every challenge, to wake beside you, to build this life together, to prove that love is stronger than hate, yes, worth everything. Clara kissed him then, pouring 3 years of gratitude and passion and partnership into the connection. When they parted, she was crying and smiling simultaneously. No more tears, Joseph said, wiping her cheeks with his thumbs. Today, we live. Tomorrow, we live. That's all anyone can do. That evening, as they sat by their fire with the miller's gift of fresh bread and their own preserved vegetables, Clara thought about the journey that had brought them here. From a desperate flight across hostile desert to this, a home, a community, a love that had weathered every storm. She'd begun as a woman fleeing bruises and cruelty, certain that one more touch would break her entirely. Touch me and I'll scream, she'd warned, and Joseph had answered with patience and kindness that taught her touch could heal rather than harm. Now she reached for his hand across their simple table, marveling at how natural it felt. His fingers closed around hers, warm and sure, and she knew that whatever tomorrow brought, they would face it as they'd faced everything else, together, unafraid, and absolutely certain that their love was worth any price the world demanded. In the distance, a coyote called to the rising moon. The painted horse, now gray with age, nickered softly in the corral. The stream gurgled its nighttime lullaby, and in their small cabin on the edge of everywhere and nowhere, Clara and Joseph held tight to their hard-won happiness, proof that sometimes the most unlikely love stories are the ones that endure. The desert had brought them together. Trust had let them grow. And courage, the courage to choose love over fear, hope over hate, had given them a future neither had dared imagine in those first desperate days. As Clara blew out the lantern and followed Joseph to their bed, she whispered a prayer of gratitude to whoever or whatever had set her on that dangerous path. Every bruise, every fear, every mile of that terrible journey had led her here, to a life where touch meant love, where screams had become laughter, and where an Apache warrior and a widow from Ohio had proven that home isn't about where you come from, but where you choose to stand, together. Thank you, dear listeners, for joining us on this incredible journey through the untamed American West. Your support means the world to us. We'd love to know where in the world you're listening to this story. Please share your location in the comments below so we can connect with our wonderful audience across the globe. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel and share your thoughts about Clara and Joseph's remarkable love story. What touched your heart the most? We read every comment and can't wait to hear from you.